Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has directed the military to enhance its preparedness for war and boost its combat capabilities, signaling a heightened emphasis on strategic deterrence amid rising tensions with the West. Xi, during an inspection of a People's Liberation Army (PLA) Rocket Force Brigade, stressed the importance of comprehensively strengthening training and war preparations to ensure the military is battle-ready. According to ISNA, the president emphasized that troops must develop solid combat capabilities and protect China's strategic security and core interests. His remarks come against the backdrop of ongoing tensions with the United States over Taiwan, which China considers an inalienable part of its territory. Beijing asserts sovereignty over the self-ruled island and maintains that Taiwan cannot engage in official diplomatic relations or join international organizations independently. The United States, however, has been fostering ties with Taiwan's government and supplying it with military equipment to Beijing's displeasure. Last month, the U.S. State Department approved a potential arms deal worth $228 million intended to supply spare parts to Taiwan's military. Taiwan's defense ministry confirmed the deal would take effect shortly. In addition to arms sales, high-profile visits by American officials to Taiwan have further strained relations between Beijing and Washington. A U.S. congressional delegation visited the island last year, following the controversial trip by former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in 2022, which prompted strong protest from China. Although Washington formally recognizes Beijing's sovereignty under the One China policy, it continues to provide military and diplomatic support to Taiwan.
China's Communist Party, Tim Walz, and the threat to America. Welcome back to More War Monday, folks. The Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube, and our X-Space is simulcast. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping has directed the military to enhance its preparedness for war and boost its combat capabilities, signaling a heightened emphasis on strategic deterrence amid rising tensions with the West, and I would posit a step further towards war. This aligns with his previously stated thoughts about being prepared for war over Taiwan by 2027. Here at home, though, Minnesota Governor and Democrat Vice Presidential nominee Tim Walz's connections to China reveal these ties to the Chinese Communist Party that make him unfit to serve as vice president, in my opinion. Walz has never really adequately explained his pattern of travel and connections to China to the American people. That should be presenting a huge flashing red warning light and siren to all of us. So much so that the House of Representatives has an ongoing investigation of Walz. China's leader is also traveling to Russia as we speak for this year's BRICS Leaders Summit, which is being attended by the group's new members for the first time. Xi's expected to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the summit, another sign of increasing economic and national security ties between these two nations. Well, my guest today is China expert and author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, his latest of many, many works exposing the threat of China's Communist Party to all of us, Gordon Chang. Gordon, welcome to the Rob Maness Show, sir.
Thank you very much, Colonel.
Well, I have to tell you, I had to lead with this announcement by Xi again about telling his forces to prepare for war. And I don't think most Americans see the actual clips where he's wearing uniforms, he's talking to formations of troops or standing on a ship when he says these things. And this really looks to be much more serious than the previous times he's uttered those words. What is going on at this point that makes everybody go, is he going to take the step that we all think he's going to take?
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on, Colonel, and you have to break them down. First of all, domestically, China is in a grim situation, especially with its economy. It's not growing at the 4.6% pace that they claim for the third quarter. It's probably zero. But even if it were growing at 4.6%, it's not growing fast enough to pay back debt. And Xi Jinping, I think, knows that, and he knows that his only way out is a war. But also, the reason why Xi Jinping's comments 3 or 4 days ago are so important is because at the same time, we are seeing the Chinese military engage in a very provocative exercises circling Taiwan and also belligerent acts in the South China Sea against the Philippines. And so this is occurring at the same time we're seeing Russia in Ukraine. That's a China proxy war in a sense because the Russians couldn't maintain it without Chinese support. China's also fighting proxy wars in North Africa and in the Middle East against Israel. So this is a world aflame, and the Chinese have lit the match.
Yeah, and all this while, the United States appears to be looking the wrong direction. I mean, I know you've talked about it. I'm part of a group that has been talking about how America needs to be turning to build a very large deterrent capability on against the Chinese Communist Party, or they are going to take that final step. Do you think that we can turn the ship so that we're focused in the right direction?
Well, all it takes is for the President of the United States to sit behind the Resolute desk and address the American people. Now, Biden won't do that. And I think Biden knows how bad the situation is because he actually did give a candid talk about China August of last year to Democratic Party fundraisers in Salt Lake City, Utah. But he hasn't had that conversation with the American people. And that's absolutely essential because while Xi Jinping talks about going to war all the time, and while he's actually preparing for it, we're a society that thinks it's at peace. And we have a Pentagon at the upper reaches that is, I think, moving in all the wrong directions.
Yeah, the directions the Pentagon is going, you said they were the wrong directions. I mean, I don't think we've got an aircraft carrier battle group in the Pacific region right now, do we?
The George Washington, as we speak, is steaming towards Yokosuka, which is our main naval base in Japan, just south of Tokyo. People can argue about this, but I don't think we should have a carrier battle group home ported in so close to China, and largely because we'll start the next war with one fewer carrier because that base is going to be leveled with Chinese missiles for which we have no defenses. So I believe, and most people disagree with me, but I believe that we shouldn't be home porting a carrier in Japan at this moment. But the thing is that bothers me is that you have, for instance, a chief of naval operations, and she says, look, we're preparing for 2027, but her Navy just issued a contract to take the reactor out of the Nimitz, which is the oldest of the Nimitz-class carriers. Now, if you think you're really going to war and you want to retire the Nimitz, which is a controversial decision in itself, but if you think you should retire the Nimitz, you want to keep the reactor intact because we are going to lose carriers, and you want to have a spare one. So the actions of the Navy undermine its words when it comes to going to war with China. Same thing is true for the Air Force. They want to take F-22s out of operation. That to me is inconceivable.
Yeah, it's really remarkable, Gordon. And to your point about porting a carrier battle group in Japan, I think there's a good argument to be made that you're right about that. What I argue for is enough presence and capability available to provide a deterrent. Where the ships are ported, especially that close to China, is a high risk if you're in Japan or anywhere within that region as far as your port location goes, and you're not maneuvering. But B, just being in the vicinity. But do we really even have enough sea lift capability to do a war that's nautical based, that's Navy based, if we were to go to all out war with China in the Pacific, or worse, end up in a global war, which is likely if they were to take this step while everything's going on with Ukraine and the Middle East right now. I mean, we don't have enough capability from a merchant marine ship perspective to even come close to thinking about matching the Chinese in their ability to build these ships, regardless of what their economic situation is.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're actually laying up merchant ships that are part of the Navy's supply line because we don't have the people to run them. And that means that we are a Navy which is much less capable than it appears, because a war with China could take a very long time, and we would need that sea lift capability. You know, when you go look across the U.S. military, we are just not prepared for what's happening. And it's a problem with the political leadership of our country, but it's also the problem of generals and admirals who are not willing to tell the truth. You know, yes, of course, they have to obey the commander in chief, but they also have an obligation to Congress to say what they actually think. And they have not discharged that obligation to Congress. So I fault the senior leadership in the Pentagon. Now, when you talk about getting ready in the lower reaches of the Air Force and the Navy, yes, they are trying to get ready and they're moving as fast as they can. But they're burdened by the 3 and 4 stars who are political and who have decided that it is better for their own personal promotion that they not talk about the way things actually are. And that means we're being let down by our Pentagon.
Yeah, Air Force 4-star Mike Minahan, who I served with, made some really good statements not long ago, and I know he had to be told to shut up, I'm sure, because he's gone very silent from a public perspective. But he was absolutely right. We have to prepare our forces, and that's one of the things that gives me hope. And something you just said is that, you know, in the lower reaches of the Air Force and the Navy, we still have folks that are doing their jobs, lower level commanders that are preparing their forces to do this fight. But without the logistics capability and without the political will and without generals and admirals that will step up and do the right thing and say the right thing, none of that really makes a big difference if you get into a shooting war, and that's the situation you're in, does it?
Yeah, General Minahan is a hero. And the thing that is distressing is that he had to retire. He was not promoted. So, you know, Minahan was very clear, you know, we are in a desperate situation. He was getting Transcom, the part of the Air Force that he was responsible for. He was getting Transcom into shape, and they're still working very hard, that problem. But they need leadership like Minahan's, and unfortunately, he's no longer a general.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, sir, we've got a live audience that I let ask a question every segment if we had time. Let's go ahead and take a question. Our host is Shell over there. Shell, go ahead with the first question.
We have Wib, sir.
Thank you, Shell. Thank you, Colonel. And thank you, Mr. Chang. My question is the difference between the administration's handling of Taiwan with China and the difference of the administration handling what's been going on here domestically with China. It almost seems like they're defending Taiwan against China more than they're defending us against China.
Well, if you look at the southern border, they were just allowing people to come in and some with very suspicious ties. We know that the composition, for instance, of Chinese migrants has changed. Go back 2 years ago, we were seeing primarily family groups. In other words, people who were desperate to live in a free society. Now, at least 2/3 of the Chinese migrants that are coming across our southern border are coming in packs of 5 to 15. They're single males traveling without family members, some of them pretending not to speak English. U.S. Border Patrol knows that some of them have links to the Chinese military. And all of this is occurring while we're seeing an increase in incursions and attempted incursions into our military facilities by Chinese and other nationals. These incursions occur weekly, and this means that they're preparing to attack our military bases here. Now, we have, as a nation, decided that we are going to defend ourselves far from our shores. In other words, off the coast of East Asia and in Europe, because we have believed for more than a century that when defense of our nation comes into play, we want to do it far away from the American population. And that's why we have these commitments to, and treaty commitments to various countries in East Asia, because we want to fight over there. We don't want to fight in Hawaii, and we don't want to fight in California.
Absolutely right, sir. We've got to take a commercial break. When we come back, though, I want to bring the Tim Walz controversy, the governor of Minnesota and the VP Democrat vice presidential nominee, into this discussion, because I think it's critical. We can't have somebody with those types of ties to the Chinese Communist Party being in the second highest office of the land, in my opinion. So we'll be right back with Mr. Gordon Chang talking about China's threat to America, and not just overseas, but right here at home on World.
It appears that Tim Walz just simply likes China. He likes the way they operate. He likes the way they do business, and he thinks that the business model in China that's helped reduce poverty could be a great business model in the United States.
The House Oversight Committee has subpoenaed Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas for intelligence reports and communications regarding Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and his ties to the Chinese Communist Party. This comes as Republicans increase their scrutiny of Walz, who is a potential Democratic vice presidential nominee for 2024. Committee Chairman James Comer stated a whistleblower mentioned a group chat among Department of Homeland Security employees called NST-NFT Biweekly Sync, which may contain relevant information about Walz. Comer emphasized the investigation into the CCP began long before Walz's nomination. He expressed concern if a state governor is connected to the CCP, it could reveal weaknesses in U.S. defenses against Chinese influence. Republicans have noted Walz has visited China 30 times, including for his honeymoon. They're also examining his past organization of a trip to China for students while he was a teacher. Comer has reached out to the FBI about Walz's promotion of the Hormel Institute, which collaborates within the Wuhan Institute of Virology. GOP lawmakers are questioning whether Walz's experiences in China could affect his foreign policy decisions if he becomes vice president. The subpoena requires Mayorkas to present unredacted materials and reports related to Walz and his staff by October 7 at 10 a.m.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, where we talk about war policy, impending wars, current wars, and my guest is renowned China expert, analyst, and author Gordon Chang. Gordon, I have to bring Walz in here as a retired military officer who has studied the communists extensively in my own career. This problem with Tim Walz is much bigger than anybody in the corporate media is allowing to be reported about, isn't it?
Yeah, Tim Walz talks like a communist, and he could be president of the United States in the not too distant future. When we look at Waltz, we have to go back to the 1990s when he first started taking students to China to be exposed to Communist Party propaganda. In that decade and in the following one, the first decade of this century, his contacts and his business, as he called it, educational travel adventures, had to have been approved by the Communist Party's United Front Work Department. That's the part of the Communist Party that subverts foreign governments. Now, Tim Waltz can't say, well, I was young and was a knucklehead then, because we know that as governor of Minnesota, in other words, today, he has had continuous contacts with front organizations in Minnesota. Matter of fact, he appointed somebody who was essentially a CCP agent to a Minnesota state government board. So this is extremely disturbing. And as vice president, he's not subject to a security clearance review. He automatically has one. I'm not a Republican, but I say that Tim Waltz's presence on the ticket means that no American should vote for that ticket. And I would hope that Kamala Harris would drop him because of that concern.
Yeah, I am a Republican, but that's not why I'm uncomfortable with this guy. It's because I'm an American in my profession. Why would a military person or a strategist like you look at this man and say, "Oh, there's no risk here"? When you think about the machinery of the Chinese Communist Party from an intelligence perspective, just kind of highlight what folks should know about this guy. I mean, you mentioned that for a decade, when he was a young man, he's going over there, and the United Front Workers Party organization is helping him and looking at him. Isn't that an intelligence operation that's making contacts with prospective espionage conductors or spies for China on the United States?
Absolutely. Now, if Tim Waltz applied for a security clearance, he could not get one. But as vice president of the United States and as president of the United States, he's automatically cleared. No one gives him a security clearance because he's automatically presumed to be loyal. But I'm not sure that's the case because he talks like a communist. He's acted like a communist. He defends communist principles because we hear what he says about communism and about socialism. So this puts the United States at grave danger if he's elected vice president.
Yeah, and he's unusually pro censorship and information and free speech suppression, even by Democrat standards, which a lot of people call Marxists. Just your average Democrat politician these days. Waltz takes it to a level that's really concerning. We really got to look at this guy. Well, we've got a hand up over in the audience. Let's go ahead and take that question real quick. Go ahead, Shel.
Yes, sir. Jim Bob has a question in the audience. I'm going to read it to you real quick. He's asking, is there a real possibility that China makes a move on our cyber infrastructure and invades Taiwan on election day? I almost read, could you ask Mr. Chang? But that's what we're doing right now.
Thank you.
Well, the answer to that is anything is possible. We have to be prepared for anything at any time, at any place. Now, the U.S. intelligence agencies have been warning of a cyber attack around the election time. And they, basically other people have said this could be a cyber 9/11. So it could very well happen. And the timing of problem with Taiwan, that could be any time as well. The authorities in Taiwan are actually telling visiting foreigners that they expect China to impose a quarantine on Taiwan within the next 6 months. Now, a quarantine is technically not an act of war, but in these circumstances, a quarantine would lead to a war because of various reasons, including China's domestic political situation. Right now, only the most hostile answers are considered to be acceptable in Beijing. So that means once you have a quarantine, it doesn't work, it becomes a blockade, which is an act of war, which then becomes a war itself. So yes to everything about that question.
So are they taking something, taking a play out of our playbook? Isn't that a quarantine what President Kennedy used in the Cuban Missile Crisis? Is that the same
Yes.
concept?
Yeah, he
Wow.
used a quarantine. He imposed the quarantine because he did not want to impose a blockade because of the distinction that I made.
Yeah, that's troubling. It certainly is. If Waltz were to become vice president, how would that shift the way China views the United States from a practical perspective, Gordon?
Well, that would be, let's talk about Harris as president. Forget about what Harris thinks. We know that every American president, Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, gives China a grace period when they become president. And this grace period can extend to months and maybe even a year or two. Now, Trump has been president. He has been burned by the Chinese. I think the grace period in a Trump administration would either be zero or it would be very, very short. Harris, on the other hand, just forget what she thinks. She's going to give them a longer period. The other thing about Harris is that she's not interested in foreign affairs. And we know this because of the Seymour Hersh reporting that she actually told the director of national intelligence not to send her the president's daily brief every morning. That's the collection of the U.S. intelligence for the preceding 24 hours, which means that she is just not interested. And that means China has, I think, more of an opportunity to write on a blank slate than to actually influence someone who had views about China going into the office. I don't think she does. We also know she told 60 Minutes that Iran is America's number one security threat, not China. And we also know that there'd be one guy named Tim Waltz who would be whispering in her ear. So this doesn't look good for any number of reasons.
Yeah, even today, folks are worried about the Biden family's potential compromise because of their financial dealings with the Chinese Communist Party. This would be even worse. And if they were to win, and you combine that with the current crop of generals and admirals, would China see that as an opening to go ahead and forcibly take Taiwan if they haven't already?
It would be an opening for something, Colonel. I don't know if it would necessarily be Taiwan. The reason why I think China would try to impose a quarantine on Taiwan is because they don't feel ready to start hostilities with a full-scale invasion. Xi Jinping doesn't trust his generals and admirals. The Chinese people certainly don't want a war with Taiwan. And the Chinese regime is casualty averse. So I'm not sure it would be Taiwan. I think that the reason why we're seeing so much activity in the South China Sea is because the Chinese believe that that would be an easy win. They could intimidate the Philippines to back down, which, by the way, they're wrong about that calculation. But nonetheless, I think that's the way that Beijing sees it. But whatever it is, Colonel, we know that China is lashing out. He's lashing out against the Japanese, the Taiwanese, the Filipinos, and the Indians all at the same time, in addition to running those three proxy wars that I mentioned: Ukraine, North Africa, Middle East.
Yeah, it's I keep coming back to the same phrase. It's very concerning. When we see that, and then we start talking about their economic condition. I want to get into that in this organization, BRICS organization summit that's about to happen or is happening, I think, right now in the next segment, because I don't think many folks here on the ground in America have a good insight into the economics of how China operates and the status of its population and the status of its government related to the population. And then how that weighs into what you talked about earlier, which is domestic politically that Xi is weak. So I want to talk a little bit about that and see how that flows together, and then we'll go into this exercise they did in Taiwan again in the last segment and talk about the forces that they would need really in reality to do that, and what we should be observing and looking for as a tell to see that whether something like an attack on Taiwan might actually happen. We'll be right back on Worldview 2 with my guest, Gordon Chang.
We live in uncertain times. In fact, we live at a time when our own governments all over the world are warning us that there could be big problems with our power grid. World War III seems to be right on the horizon. Let me ask you this. Do you have a satellite phone? Should communications go down with cell towers? Do you have a satellite phone to get a hold of that college student or your spouse who travels, whatever it might be, to get a hold of your senior adult parents? We have satellite phones at worldviewtalk.com, and you get the satellite phone for free when you sign up for their very reasonable payment programs for the service. Sign up for the service with a reasonable contract, get the satellite phone for free. Worldviewtalk.com. You'll also find they have, well, what I now have, which is a solar generator. Yeah, I have a gas generator, an LP propane generator, but what if that goes down? I want to back up to my backup. So I now have a solar generator as well. You'll find them at worldviewtalk.com. Check it out today, worldviewtalk.com.
The most important news of the day, CCN. China's trade with BRICS surges, a $653 billion boost in emerging markets. China's trade with BRICS countries surged by 5.1% year-on-year, reaching 4.62 trillion yuan, approximately $653 billion, in the first 3 quarters of 2024. Officials emphasize the importance of BRICS as a crucial platform for developing nations to collaborate, particularly in sectors like steel and textiles, further enhancing their global influence after expanding its membership earlier this year.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and my guest is China expert, renowned author on China and its efforts, really, I've got to be frank with you, to take down the United States of America and its allies. His new book is out called Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. And this is serious business. Gordon, the BRICS organization is a lot of things to a lot of people when you read about it in the media. They're having their 2024 summit in Russia. And Xi Jinping is going to meet with Putin, as I mentioned in my opening monologue. But, China's economy isn't what it may seem, is it?
No, it's not. It is, as I mentioned, it's not growing at the reported pace, and it's certainly not growing fast enough to pay down debt. Xi Jinping is taking it in the wrong directions. He's having problems and he can't solve them. And because of that, there's a pessimism in China right now. And we're seeing that from any number of different indications about the way the Chinese people are acting. So there is a country in distress. And the reason why this is important to us is because I think Xi Jinping sees his way out as a war of some sort or some quick political win, an annexation of Philippine Island, a quarantine over Taiwan. We don't know where it'll come, but we can see China's lashing out.
Yeah, you mentioned the Philippines in the last segment at the end there. The Philippines, they really didn't want the United States to be back in their country, but they've invited our military back in the last year in a very extensive way, and we're conducting joint exercises with them in the areas where China is challenging them. Do you think the Chinese are deterred at all by that? Because we continue to see these aggressive moves on the shoals, that are in Philippine territorial waters.
Yes, the Biden State Department has issued 12 written warnings that the United States is prepared to use force to discharge our obligations pursuant to our 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty with Manila. Biden himself has issued 3 oral warnings, all very explicit about the use of force. And the Chinese continue with these provocative acts. They're seizing Philippine ships, ramming them, injuring Philippine sailors. At the end of last month, a Chinese missile boat used a high-intensity laser on a Philippine civilian aircraft, therefore endangering the crew. And that certainly was an escalation. So clearly we're not deterring them in the South China Sea. I think the Chinese thought that they could grab a shoal from the Philippines. Filipinos, though, are really tough, and they are pushing back. They're plucky. And they're giving the Chinese a lot of heartburn right now.
Yeah, you can see it in their activities when we get the rare video clip of the ships coming together. They do not back down, and rightly so. It's their territory. As from an economic perspective, is China's activity in BRICS helping it? Is it shoring up its weaknesses, or is there something else going on there with this relationship with Russia, especially? Because we're hearing that they've come to another deal with India about their border situation, which they violated before, by the way, I have to add. But there seems to be more going on than meets the eye from an economic and a strategic relationship perspective in BRICS.
Yeah, and the economic perspective is the important one, I think. Xi Jinping has turned his back on consumption as the sustainable basis for the Chinese economy. Almost every economy is based on consumption. Ours, more than 70% of gross domestic product is attributable to consumption. In China, it's 38%. Xi Jinping wants to export his way out of his crisis, which means he needs access to markets. But he knows that the United States and the European Union are starting to close their markets because of China's criminal and predatory trade behavior. And the problem for Xi Jinping is that he's also getting pushback from global South countries. So Xi Jinping needs to keep those markets in the BRICS nations open. And I think that's why this is an important meeting for him. Also, as you point out, he's going to meet Putin in Russia, where the BRICS summit is going to be. They have met so many times. They are coordinating their policies. They are challenging the world. And this looks quite dangerous when you start to look at how Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are all on the same page, attacking the international system and attacking us.
Yeah, truly, it's an alliance, not just a ad hoc partnership. From what I can see happening, they act like an alliance, both economically and militarily. Putin was talking this week, comparing the BRICS to the equivalent of the G7. So the challenge against the liberal world order, so to speak, that folks are used to since after World War II, is definitely on the table, Gordon. You know, and that's one of the things why your book got my attention, Plan Red, the new one, you know, because we've heard about the Chinese in a declared unrestricted war against the United States, even from the mouths of PLA colonels that have written about it. But something is happening that's going to a different level, in my opinion. And I'd just like to give you a chance to talk about that, what you see as this unrestricted warfare and what the change is, because there is a change happening. And I don't think a lot of experts have put their finger on it yet.
Yeah, unrestricted warfare comes from the title of that 1999 book by two Chinese Air Force colonels, where they argue that China has the right to do anything and everything to take down the U.S. In May 2019, People's Daily, which is the most authoritative publication in China, actually carried a landmark editorial that declared a people's war on us. Now, people's war is a phrase which has great meaning in Communist Party thought. It means total war, as PLA Daily, an official publication of the Chinese military, told us last year. So this is unrestricted warfare, total warfare on the U.S. And although we're Americans, so we think we have the right to ignore what our enemies say about us, we have to start paying attention, because through all of this propaganda, China is establishing a justification to kill Americans. It's as simple as that. And we have to understand the purpose of this propaganda. These are not just mere words. This is laying the groundwork for an attack on America.
Yeah, when I hear you talk about it and read your writings, I think about the COVID-19 virus. And why was that significant from a Chinese perspective on the impact on every single country in the world?
Yeah, this was the first time in history that one nation has attacked all the others. Now, We don't know 100% the origins of SARS-CoV-2, which is the pathogen that causes COVID-19, but 99% it was engineered at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But there is something, Colonel, that we know 100%. 100% we know that once this disease got out into the Chinese public, that Xi Jinping made a decision to deliberately spread it beyond his borders. We know that at least December 2019, and maybe earlier, but at least December 2019 and January 2020, the Chinese leadership knew that this was highly transmissible human to human, but they told the world it was not. And while they were locking down their own country, and lockdowns are controversial, but by locking down their own country, they were telling the world they thought this was an effective way to stop disease. So while these guys were locking down their own country, they were pressuring others to take arrivals from China without travel restrictions or quarantine. You put those two things together, and it means that China deliberately spread this disease. That means 7 million people who died from COVID-19 outside China were murdered. And that number includes 1.2 million Americans. Now, people can argue about the death toll from COVID-19. People can say that that number, which comes from Johns Hopkins, is too high. But anything above 0 is unacceptable. No murder of an American is acceptable.
Yeah, regardless of how you argue that, I mean, the all-source mortality rates are through the roof during that period for every demographic. So, except for very, very young, healthy people, you know, and kids. So, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I remember seeing the information coming in that there's a large worker population of Chinese in Italy. And they were flying to and from there from Wuhan's airport, and then flying from Italy to the United States to do things like Mardi Gras. I lived just north of New Orleans during 2020. And guess what? The disease hit New Orleans and started spreading from there. And all you had to do was pay attention and follow that activity. But it's even more than that. I mean, unrestricted warfare, the title leads, I think, the average person to believe, okay, they're not restricting themselves. But, I mean, now every single thing is on the table. You talked about the Chinese population coming into the southern border, and when I track on numbers, I see and hear numbers upwards of like 100,000 military-age males that have come through that southern border since Joe Biden took office just 3.5 years ago. That is a huge number. Even if it's slightly wrong, it's still a large number, and they're not bringing families. And nobody leaves China unless they escape, like great Americans have done that are American citizens and have sought asylum here. But the numbers just can't add up to that level without the Chinese Communist Party being involved. What is this population likely up to that has come in here? If nothing is off the table, what are they up to?
Well, we know that while this is occurring, that there have been a noticeable increase in activity, attempted incursions into our military facilities. And so there's a correlation there. The other thing, though, is that lab in Reedley, California, which was a secret Chinese biological weapons facility. And so therefore, they had 1,000 mice there that had been genetically engineered to spread disease. So we can imagine that the migrants are going to take those mice and spread them around the U.S. to weaken our ability to save our friends and allies and partners in the around the world.
Yeah, and then the drug trade. Are they facilitating receipt of things like fentanyl? That obviously the materials come to China, go to Mexico, get put together by the cartels, and then transported over. But could these people be set up in teams to facilitate that distribution and sale of that level of activity, like fentanyl drugs?
Well, yes, because that's a project of the Communist Party to weaken the United States with fentanyl. We know that the Chinese are coming across not only our southern but our northern borders, and many of them are trying to avoid detection, which means they're coming here for some nefarious purpose. So we know and we should be concerned, but we're not tracking them.
Yeah, and that's a big question I have after this last break, sir. I want to take it in the direction of what should America be doing, because those of us that are in this profession and have studied it, both military and civilian, many are frustrated by the lack of an appropriate strategy and action plan to put China on the back foot and deter them so that we don't get into a regional war or, worse yet, a global World War III that could turn nuclear very easily. We'll be right back with Mr. Gordon Chang here on the Rob Maness Show on Worldview 2.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Melissa and I have been taking Bella Grace, this powerful elixir, since last fall, 2023. The results have been amazing. My hands would crack and bleed, deep cuts and cracks every winter for years. No matter what we did, we couldn't get them to stop cracking and bleeding. This year, I took Bella Grace, no cracking, no bleeding. My acid reflux, gone. Haven't had to take a Pepsid. My hair growth, the last 2 times I had my hair cut, the lady had to use thinning shears on my hair. That's amazing. We've also received incredible feedback from you, our listening audience, and the impact it's had for you. This is loaded with astaxanthin. That's a powerful antioxidant. Collagen, but top grade collagen. Studies show 95% of it is being absorbed in the body because of the way they develop it. Then we have something called cat's claw. That's an anti-inflammatory from a vine in Peru. It's the bark, and it's an anti-inflammatory. There are about 80 clinical trials on Bella Grace. Please get a subscription now and save. MelissaHouseBG.com.
Communist China launches new war games near Taiwan, sparking anger in Taipei and concerns in Washington. What the CCP says the drills are for, plus the U.S. reaction.
They've shown no signs of any sort of conciliation towards Taiwan, and this is very, very serious.
A wave of sanctions by Beijing against one of Taiwan's wealthiest and a prominent lawmaker. A look at China's latest move amid large-scale military drills. Trade negotiations with...
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show here on More War Monday, Worldview Tube Live, and our X Spaces simulcast. And unfortunately, Gordon had to leave us early for the rest of the show, but we've got a lot of great questions from the audience. And, Gordon's book goes on, the Plan Red book goes on to ask the question, what would Ronald Reagan's playbook look like if America were really serious about taking on China? And we need to be thinking that way, folks. We absolutely do need to be thinking that way, because Ronald Reagan's playbook, remember, took on the old Soviet Union communists economically and militarily. And essentially, we outspent them, even though we still had some economic trouble when Reagan first came into office, based on the Carter dismal economy and those years with very high interest rates, fuel prices, and those kind of things. So while President Reagan got to work on that, he still had to take on the Soviet Union because there was a stalemate. There was a stalemate, and this Soviet behemoth was increasingly acting very reckless in some cases. So that part of our strategy had to be really created and beefed up. And in order to do that, the military budget had to be dramatically increased, and the types of capabilities America was fielding increased. And what worked out was we outspent them, and the Soviets were not able essentially to keep up with us from a defense budget capability, and they tried to do it, and it crashed their economy, which led to the fall of the Berlin Wall and a whole bunch of other things collapsing that resulted in the geopolitical arena that we essentially see today without a Soviet communist country over in the Eastern Bloc. Well, we've got a question over in the audience. Let's go ahead and take that. We've got about 8 minutes left in the show. Happy to entertain some more questions.
We have Wib, sir.
Thank you again, Shell. Thank you, Colonel. I would like to reference back to the beginning of the show when is it Dr. Shang or just Mr. Shang? When he was referencing the rhetoric coming out of China, where Xi Jinping was talking about, telling his military that they have to get ready and be capable of destruction. You are a commander. You've commanded forces. How much of that was motivational rhetoric to his troops, and how much of it could be considered indicators of what they are talking about? Because we have American leaders that talk about the military needs to be trained to break things and kill people. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to declare war on anybody.
That's true. That's true. We referenced General Mike Minahan, who's now retired from the Air Force, who was the commander of U.S. Transportation Command and Air Mobility Command back in the 22-23 timeframe, when he laid out a plan, an aggressive one, and talked from the perspective of we need to be ready to fight in 2025 against the Chinese Communist Party. And it's got to be a fight that's bigger than just defending Taiwan. It's going to be a fight that's at a minimum a regional war and probably a global war. And Mike Minahan used much of the same terminology, but he's a general, okay? And Xi is the commander-in-chief, yeah. But he combined those first remarks, not this latest episode over the last 24 hours, but the first ones that you heard where he talked about preparing for battle, et cetera, to the troops, to his military leadership in the committee of the Chinese Communist Party Congress from, I think it's the 20th Congress, a bit over a year ago, where he told them to be ready for war. But this time, and Mr. Chang brought it in nicely, he mentioned the People's War. It's been written about in the communist newspapers. It's been talked about by President Xi. And that's another step beyond unrestricted warfare and just being ready for battle. That includes every single thing. One of the things he talks about in his book, Mr. Chang does, is that this is China has American society has been penetrated by the Chinese Communist Party so thoroughly that they can kill Americans without impunity. And you know what? That's true. When you look at the 100,000 fentanyl deaths, give or take a few thousand up or down over the last 4 years, those are directly attributable to the Chinese Communist Party government's activities. So, this war, this People's War, is a step beyond just the regular terminology of the unrestricted warfare, where they try to touch us everywhere at the same time and whittle us down over time. But this is very aggressive. And Gordon uses the term, it's going to turn to a political war from unrestricted war, or a hot war has the potential to turn very, very quickly. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Who's next, Shell?
Lieutenant Colonel Larry Brock, sir.
Hey, sir, I missed the first part of the show, and I apologize for that. But recently, when they encircled Taiwan, they crossed the border. There was a treaty that I was not aware of. Did your guest talk about the treaty between the PRC, the ROC, and the U.S. about them not crossing that, and how frequently they violated that line recently?
No, we haven't talked about that, but the median line in the Taiwan Straits, I think, is what you're referring to. And yes, they're crossing it. They're crossing it increasingly. As a matter of fact, I was going to talk about that most recent exercise with Gordon, but he had to leave. And that is that this exercise was a pop-up exercise, number one, and it's like the second or third one of the year. And the Chinese have gone from from just challenging shipping and aircraft in the straits of Taiwan, crossing that median line or coming right up to it, going into their air defense identification zone, and establishing orbits and those kind of things, to now they're surrounding the island of Taiwan, north, south, east, and west, outside, well beyond just the straits of Taiwan. And they're able to do it very quickly. And that's what got my attention with this latest exercise. This exercise only lasted 24 hours. Previous ones have lasted several days. But the rapidity of them being able to establish these zones all the way around the island, from the surface to all the way up through the airspace, and essentially establish a temporary quarantine, almost a blockade, so rapidly, probably is why it's getting so much attention, because that takes a lot of effort and a lot of capability that many analysts don't believe China has yet. And there's a lot of discussion and debate over the intelligence we have, the capabilities they have, the capabilities that they're growing. They're rapidly growing their intercontinental ballistic missile, nuclear missile capability. They doubled the size of their launcher force in that regard. They're rapidly building a larger capital ship navy, combat ship navy that exceeds even the United States by more than 20 capital ships now, I believe. Their merchant marine production and manufacturing capability far, far exceeds anything any Western country has, but especially the United States. That's why you keep hearing me and others talk about improving our manufacturing base, not just in the defense community, but across the board. And I think one of the reasons that I support Donald Trump is that he's committed to reshoring manufacturing capability in the United States, so that we look more like the manufacturing behemoth, not a military one, but a civilian one that entered World War II, because it was that manufacturing, large manufacturing capability that was able to be turned into one that produced. Well, we destroyed like 20,000 B-17s that were never flown because we had produced them so many at the end of World War II. And that was based on that manufacturing capability. Well, we've given that up. And a lot of it went to China and Mexico and those kind of things. And that's not sexy to talk about. And a lot of people don't really follow it. But that manufacturing capability, especially of merchant marine ships, these are the gray Navy ships that carry stuff and are manned by civilian merchant marine officers and sailors. We don't have enough of them. Mr. Chang mentioned that we're putting like 12 or 17 aside because of lack of crews, not because the ships are worn out, but the lack of crews. China has like a ability to build over 1,000 ships like that in a year, where we might be able to build 5. That's a dramatic difference in manufacturing ability right there. And that's just in the shipping. And that in a war in the Pacific, you have to have that level of Navy, capital ship, and logistics capability in order to control the theater, so that your forces can be adequately resupplied and adequately fed and housed, so they can get into that fight. Because there's going to be a lot lost very rapidly, and if you can't build it, resupply it, and keep your folks protected with enough ammunition for like air defense and those kind of things, then it's not going to be a very long war, and you're not likely to come out on the winning side if you can't do that. And China's got the advantage because their shoreline is right there. I mean, they don't have to expand out over the Pacific Ocean like the Allies do if we have to get into that fight. And it'll start over Taiwan, maybe even the Philippines. That was an interesting perspective that Gordon put out in the Philippines. Well, we've come to the end of broadcast show, and I appreciate everybody. Thank you for the questions. The guest has been fantastic. And tomorrow we will have Training Tuesday, and Colonel John Mills is here, and we're going to talk about drones over U.S. Air Force and Navy bases inside the United States and where that's coming from. Let me tell you, it's probably China. I'll see you tomorrow on Worldview 2.